Shalom, good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's class. Remember to visit us at BN, as in B'nai Noach Academy.org. If you have any questions throughout this class, please do not hesitate and go to Ask Me, it's one word, Ask Me at TorahQuestions.com. Torah Questions is spelled Torah, questions.com. Today's class is titled Passover. Passover, its lessons and inspiration as they apply in our everyday life. Now, what is Passover? If you look in the Torah, as one studies the Torah, perhaps not in the first book of the Torah. First book of the Torah is mainly all about pre-Egypt. It does mention Egypt, to be sure. It mentions Egypt in the context of Joseph being sold to Egypt, but it's not in the context of what we're talking about and what we celebrate on Passover. Now, to be sure, Jews celebrate Passover, but Passover, the idea of Passover, the concept of Passover, what Passover is about, is something which we all need to celebrate, or I should say better, implement, apply to our day-to-day lives. And I'll explain. But first, as I started saying, once you see this idea of Egypt as a place of enslavement, once you see it come up on the map, meaning from the second book of the Torah, the book of Exodus, all the way till the end of the Torah, it keeps on, in one way or another, every so often, it keeps on, so to speak, pounding away at this idea of Egypt. As the Torah says, do not forget the day you left Egypt. Celebrate this so you can remember the day you left Egypt, right? It's such an integral part. In fact, I have to tell you, for one who's obligated to observe Jewish custom and ritual, in Jewish custom and ritual, so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis, especially when it comes to the special celebrations, those unique festivals, it's all about Egypt, leaving Egypt, going out of Egypt. For example, Jews are required to recite the Shema. That's the prayer in which we announce our subservience to the oneness of God, and we proclaim God as one. And it has two chapters, two paragraphs. The third paragraph speaks about the exodus of Egypt. And in fact, that's the reason why it was placed adjacently to the Shema as part of this daily reading, this daily ritual, in order for one to never forget the exodus from Egypt. Day in, day out, leaving Egypt, leaving Egypt, leaving Egypt. On the Sabbath, how does a Jew formally begin the Sabbath? How does a Jew formally begin celebrating the Sabbath? When a Jew sits down to his Sabbath meal, sits down for this meal, he first, or she first, recites a special blessing, a benediction over a cup of wine. In that blessing, we basically make the statement and explain what we're going to do. We thank God for giving us this holy day of the Sabbath, which will be a class in itself, what the Sabbath is about and what it could teach us. And in that class, in that reading, in that blessing, we say that this is a commemoration of the creation of the world, which it is, right? Commemorating the Sabbath is basically acknowledging and announcing our firm belief in the fact that God created the world for 6 days of creation, and on the seventh he rested. But then we also say, Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim. This is a remembrance for the exodus from Egypt. So once again, every single Jewish custom and celebration is somehow or another tied in with Egypt. Jewish males are required to put on the phylacteries, the box that is on the hand and on the head, every single day, every single weekday, that is. And again, they're supposed to remember while doing it what's written inside. And what's written inside? 3 out of the 4 portions that are written there all have the mention, strong mention, and a strong correlation to the Exodus of Egypt. So this begs the following question, the obvious one. You know, anybody who's dealt with any issues in life, and everybody has some problems, everybody has some pains from the past. But how does the saying go? What's the right way to live life? How do you move forward? Well, let's take the analogy of driving a car. You drive a car, there's a lot of glass in the car. Besides having a strong body and everything that you need, the engine and the transmission and everything and so on, and the brakes, of course, you need to have a windshield. A windshield is a very large glass, so you can see out in all directions and you can have total peripheral vision to see the entire road ahead of you. Windshield's dirty, you can't see. It's raining, you need to put on the window wipers. You have to be able to see clearly. But then you have another glass. And it's just perched up right there where you can glance at it. The rear view mirror. It's important to have a rear view mirror so you know what's going on behind you. Someone comes up too close, you want to move, you want to change lanes, you want to make a maneuver, you want to have an appreciation of what's going on around you. But if you constantly look in that rear view mirror, you're going to crash very soon. Unless you're going backwards. You can't drive backwards. How long can one drive backwards? So in psychology, they always tell you the best practical advice is look forward. You need some time to look at that rear view mirror, take a glance, understand what's going on behind you, and especially in your history, but not to live with it, not to dwell on it day in, day out. So what is this thing? What is this requirement that the Torah says that you must remember the Exodus of Egypt each and every day of your life? It's such a core fundamental in the life of a person, especially in the life of a Jew. What is this all about? Moreover, what was really the purpose of leaving Egypt? What really did God say was the purpose of taking the Hebrews out of Egypt? Was it just to leave Egypt? No. He told Moses right from the beginning, and Moses was even meant to say it to Pharaoh, that you're going to leave this place in order to go to that mountain, in order to receive the Torah, in order to receive the knowledge, to receive God's word there, and to serve God. So if you think about it, in a sense, it seems to be a little absurd. Egypt is not about leaving Egypt. It's about going to Mount Sinai. So if you say to somebody, listen, you got to remember every single day the special occasion as you stood by the foot of Mount Sinai and God revealed himself. Okay, I understand. In fact, the Torah does say that. The Torah mandates that a Jew has to remember. One of the remembrances that a Jew has to have every day is to remember Mount Sinai. But not every single thing you do, you have to remember it. Not in the morning and at night, and then when you do this commandment, and you do this observance and this festival and that festival. What is it all about? What is it all about? And the answer is as follows. And this answer will really give us a real good perspective, a whole different perspective of what the idea, the concept of Egypt is. You see, up until this point, if you ask anyone, your average person, what is this Egypt? It's a place on a map. It's a geographical location, right? It is. Indeed, it is. We cannot run away from that. There was a place called, and there still is a place called Egypt, and they were enslaved there. But it's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot more than that. In fact, it's everything more than just that. Because if it's just that, you're like, come on, let it go. Or once a year, remember the special miracle that took place and move on. Why every single day, pound on it. Because Egypt is not a geographical location. Egypt is a concept. It's an idea. And let me explain. You see, the Hebrew alphabet, you have the alphabet and you have vowels. When you look into a Torah scroll, there are no vowels. There's no punctuations. There's no vowels. That makes it a little harder to read. You have to have a little training or practice prior to reading for the Torah. Otherwise, you don't know where the sentence begins and where it ends, unless you're well-versed. Since the words don't have vowels, many words could be read in more than one way, and they both be accurate. Well, many times it will not be true to the context of what's being read, the content. That's true. That's why one has the cue of, hey, is this the right word? Is it to be read this way or that way? But the fact that it has many different ways that it can be read, at least more than one, tells us that it's all true. Tells us that it's all true. That there is more than one truth. I'm sorry, I have to take that back. There's only one truth. But there is let's just call the revealed reading, the common reading, and then there's the deeper one, the one that brings out deeper meaning and more essence into the meaning of that passage or that verse or whatever it may be. The word Mitzrayim is Hebrew for Egypt. The word Mitzrayim, when you slightly change the vowels to that word, when you know the vowels are either below, under the letters, or on top of the letters, or sometimes on the side of the letters, they're not the letters themselves, that same word is now read Meitzarim. Meitzar means a constraint. Meitzar means a restriction. In fact, even when you put up a gate, it's called a meitzar. If somebody's being held in matzor, that means they're being held in confinement. Their movements are restricted. Thus, what is this idea of Mitzrayim? Nothing is by coincidence, by the way. The fact that they were enslaved in a place that's called Mitzrayim, which could be read Metzarim, constraints, tells us that it wasn't just about this physical place, but it was also perhaps even more about the concept, about what it represents. So you have a whole different perspective now. Mitzrayim is Mitzarim. Mitzarim means constraints, things that hold you back. Now, things that hold you back are not necessarily always obviously bad. You have things that constrain you, things that confine you, things that may make you, how would I call it? Stagnant from moving forward, from being a better person, from living life more purposefully, more meaningfully. And it may not look bad. It may not look bad. In fact, in the eyes of many, sometimes it may look fantastic. It may even be something that society looks at with awe, celebrates it, and just idolizes it. And I don't use the word idealize by mistake. Take, for example, you have people, if you ever think, I'm just taking a random example that comes to mind. You think about the trading floor on Wall Street, the stock exchange. Wow. If you look at it, you watch these people, they're in it, and they're moving big, large sums of money beyond anything that I can even conceptualize. And they're involved. And not only are they involved, but they actually sometimes, most times, seem to be very happy. They're into it. It's happening. And they look like their life is in full gear and full motion and full purpose. It's not necessarily so. It's not necessarily so. You do find a lot of people that do that. And unfortunately, outside of that, they don't really have a life. They don't really have a purpose. Not only they don't have a life and a purpose outside of that, because life is boring compared to what they're doing during the day, but that it consumes them and they're not really happy from within. And that's why you find a lot of people, and I'm not pointing and saying it's bad. I just use this as an example, where their whole life becomes that. The whole entity, the whole essence, the whole being, that they need to suddenly have different stimulants in order to create some joy, some happiness, some meaning. I want that to sink in for a second. If you ask anyone, are they successful? Very. Extremely successful. In fact, they're running the world to a degree. They're moving the world to a degree. They themselves may think that they're successful. This is their ambition. This is what they wanted to do. But they're in constraints. They are, in a way, prisoners. They are in an enslavement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And think about it now this way. If somebody, let me say it this way. What happens to us almost all the time, if not every single time, happens to us because the external things that are happening to us are really reflecting on what's within us. So when somebody is enslaved, it's because in them there's like a little slave. Somebody is trapped in Egypt in the concept, the idea, the mitzarim, that constraints, being stagnant, or being held back, or being enslaved to something. That means because within them there's a slave mentality. The slave mentality is not somebody wearing a pair of overalls and being whipped and holding a pitchfork in their hand and being forced to do labor. Sometimes it could be even worse. Mentally, psychologically, spiritually, the person is enslaved. The person is stuck. The person is not there. So what you see happening is really a perception of what's inside the person. Every single person really has a state of constraint within them. And it can even be in good things. In other words, what I described to you, and I see the way you nodded and acknowledge what I'm saying, seems to be so obvious. But then you have people, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in academics, whether it's in their work, whether it's in their careers, whether it's in their ambitions, even in their hobbies. As human beings, we all have a little measure of mitzarim, of this spiritual concept of Egypt. I want you to think of it in one way as a sense of complacency and comfort. To give you an example, which at first glance may not even seem so obvious, may not even seem so overt, but if you think about it, even when people are moving from a lesser situation to a better situation, they develop anxiety. They say one of the things that give people the most anxiety is moving. Now, it doesn't say when you're moving from a big house to a small apartment. It doesn't say when you're moving from a house to a shelter or from a good neighborhood to a bad neighborhood. It's even the reverse. And I can tell you personally, I've experienced it. There is anxiety involved, but it's good. And the mind knows you've come to the decision. You've worked for this, to buy that nice, beautiful big home, to live in a nicer neighborhood, to live in a better home, in a more modern home. But the fact that you have to tear yourself away from what you're used to, the fact that you have to get out of your, I would call it the comfort zone, because it's a certain type of default comfort zone, right? Something that you're just become accustomed to, your surroundings, that in itself generates anxiety. That is a mitzarim. I see you all nodding because that's what it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
And the same is when a person's doing well. A person's doing well. It's fantastic.
Mhm.
Not always is it fantastic. Because if the person's doing well and it's just a straight line, there's no curve whatsoever, then that person has now become entrapped, enslaved in Mitzarim, in Egypt. This can apply to everything. In relationships, we just get used to the status quo. And perhaps, unless God forbid there's a problem, we don't search out for a way to correct it, to fix it. We've reached a milestone in our lives, and that's it. We hit a glass ceiling, and we don't do more to increase. Now, by the way, make no mistake, this does not mean that a person should not appreciate and glean, personal satisfaction from their accomplishments. But if you stop right there, and this becomes the peak of your accomplishments, this becomes the peak of your endeavors, and this is where it ends, then you just fell into Egypt. You're not moving forward. So really what the idea is, what God is saying, and he's saying it to all of us, he's saying it to every single person, whether you're just an individual, whether you're a professional, whether you're a boss, whether you're an employee, a father, a mother, a spouse, a child, any type of relationship, any type of situation, any type of scenario in this world, God tells us, remember Egypt every single day. Remember Mitzrayim every single day. Don't stop striving for more. Don't become trapped in that constraint in the Mitzrayim. Don't become trapped. Let it sink in for a second. This really means that even if somebody has reached the peak of their career, you don't stop there. Again, and I want to re-emphasize, it does not mean that one should not be happy and one should not celebrate their achievements. That's also terribly wrong. If you don't do that, you're the pride. If you do that, and you don't celebrate and you don't acknowledge and you don't allow yourself that pat in the back without ego, but justifiably, to have pride in what you did, then you're also going to lose motivation, but not for the reasons of Mitzrayim, of Mitzarim, of the Egypt, but rather for other reasons, because we are wired in a way that we need to feel good about what we're doing. We need to feel good about our accomplishments. We need to feel good about those things that we own, that we earned. But if you stop there, now you've gone into slavery. Now you've volunteered for slavery. Now you've committed yourself to be enslaved in Mitzarim, in Egypt, in that constraint. And that is really the message over here. I'll give you an example. The Talmud says, it's an interesting thing. The Talmud says, what is the definition of a business person? Not somebody who buys and sells, not somebody who is, happens to have an item and sell it, but the true essence, the definition of what a true business person is, says the Talmud, it's one that when he, just using the generic term he, gender, that is, he has 100, he immediately wants 200. In other words, think about it. Realizing that he was able to achieve that, and he was able to work towards that and accomplish that. If he's not a true businessman, he's just like what we call a 9-to-5er, fine. Fine. And maybe some people have like that. And they live their whole life in Egypt. Remember, there are people who leave Egypt, who live in Egypt and have no desire to leave, physically and figuratively, literally and figuratively, right? But the Talmud says the true definition of a business person, somebody who's a true business person, And in this case, somebody who's truly excited about life, somebody who truly wants life, or for the same matter, an academic, somebody who is a wise person. What is the true definition of a wise person? Wow, I know now so much more than everybody else. So I'm done. Think about it. If it's somebody has the brightest mind in the world, theoretically, they can achieve so much and just stop. And whatever happens, they'll always know more than the rest of society, because the rest of society could never, ever reach that. Should they stop? The answer is no. Think what King Solomon says. King Solomon says in Proverbs, the more you know, the more it hurts. That's where it comes from. He says, Yosef, Da'at, Yosef Machov. One who adds in knowledge adds in pain. Why pain? There should be joy, happiness, content. You know more than everyone else. You know so much. And knowledge really is the true and absolute satisfaction and pleasure. Anybody who's endeavored in knowledge and studying things, it's a certain pleasure you don't get from anything else. Not from food, not from excitement, not from leisure, not from entertainment, not from anything. There's nothing, not from money. It's something so deep. It's such a real, true, genuine pleasure and joy that it cannot be duplicated in anything else in the world. So why then do you associate it with pain? Because the answer is a true wise person, and for that matter, the example I brought from the Talmud, a true business person is never content. And the more you know, the more you appreciate how much more there is to know and how much deeper you can go. Maybe a simpleton, somebody with a simple mind who hasn't reached that plateau, is not capable of appreciating of why. Yeah, they have an idea. There's a lot out there, but it's so out of focus for them. You know, you don't see something in focus, you don't appreciate it. It's like all a blur that they don't miss it. But the clearer you get in focus as a wise person, and like I said, this is the greatest pleasure, the more you want to go out of Egypt. The more every step becomes like another Egypt. You got to go out again, and you got to go out again, and you got to go out again. And you continue and continue and continue climbing that figurative ladder of knowledge, of wisdom. So I'm bringing just different examples. And in relationships too, you say, well, it's okay. Like if imagine somebody says, happy anniversary, how's it going? We don't fight. That's it. We don't fight. So that means that, okay, so the police will never get called to your house. But can you explain to me exactly why you're married? Like, what exactly is the relationship here? What's keeping you together? Just the fact that you can coexist? I mean, forgive me, but if I had a pet, I can also coexist with a pet. We don't fight, but that's not a marriage. It's not a relationship, right? You all understand that, right? So, oh, we don't fight. Yeah, we talk sometimes. You got to work on this relationship. Why do I have to work on it? It's not bad, but it ain't good. That is where we all fall into Egypt. And the truth is, everyone here, including myself, in some way or another, we all have our little Mitzrayim, our little Egypt, whether it's in this aspect of life, that aspect of life, and that's what God says. I don't need you to look back. Remember I said you don't drive looking in your rearview mirror. But while you're looking forward, remember, Mitzrayim is not back there. It's up front. You're going to have barriers to break through, and you have to constantly break through them. And that is how this concept of Passover, celebrating Passover, is each and every day of the year, each and every moment of the day of every day of the year. But I do want to add one small thing. It's not small. It's actually very important. And here is the question. God is obviously benevolent. We've already gone through this in the 6 days of creation. God created the world. He created the world to be kind. So if this concept, if this idea of Meitzar, of a constraint, is not good, and typically in many cases, especially when people are not aware of it, holds a person back, albeit not in the bad, but not from pursuing more good and pursuing greater heights, then why did God create such a concept? In other words, why did he so to speak, programmed it into the system. God programmed us, right? The hardware, the software, it's all God. Why did he do it? What is the benevolence here? What is the kindness here? Remember, this is a serious matter. God has to tell us every day, remember Egypt, and you beat that drum, and you beat that drum. This is serious. The answer is, and I want you to think of a stream of water minding its own business, just flowing very peacefully, very gently. What needs to be done? What do you do when you want to make that water go with a stronger force? In a larger scale, a dam that produces electricity and energy. What do? You put in a blockage. And for a moment, it may seem like the water stopped, but then it bursts through with greater force, more energy, and in more streams, more directions. It multiplies. I want you to think of that imagery. Why did God give us this Mitzrayim, this Meitzar, this constraint? Because when a person is aware of it and a person pushes through it, that gives us even more energy, even more achievement that otherwise we would never have, so to speak, that spiritual, emotional, psychological, intellectual stamina to push us through stronger. Or if you go walk by a gym, somebody who never ever exercised and has no clue about fitness, talking about just pure intellect, would say, well, if you rest, you'll have more energy. No, if you rest your muscles, after a while, you won't be able to use them. Right? The more you use them, the more you push them, obviously within limit. Obviously within reason, I mean. Right? Step by step. But the more you push them, the stronger you get. The more you build up muscle mass, the more you have now strength to do even more. That, I believe, I understand, is the reason why God gave us this concept, but he warned us and he said, please remember it all the time. In other words, use it. Use it the right way. If not, you're not going to abuse it, but you will be abused. You will now become a slave, self-inflicted slavery, self-inflicted constraint or trappedness in this Egypt, in this concept of Egypt. So that's basically the major lesson, which actually, by the way, even in the Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings, is a theme that comes up again and again and again. And I would encourage you, encouraging myself and you, that hopefully you're inspired by this, to apply it to your life. It doesn't have to be in the big grandiose things. Because remember what I said, Egypt can be in each and every detail of our life, in one way or another. That glass ceiling is not just over our head. It can be over our hearts. It can be over our hands, our actions. It can be over anything. And we need to break through it. And when we break through it, we pick up more energy, more stamina. And we bring more ability to go even higher. If we stop there, then again, we've created that Egypt. We go to the next level, whether it's careers, relationship, academics, whatever it may be. I said even in hobbies. Once somebody has a hobby, they do the same exact thing for the next 50 years. Yeah. Even an animal would get bored doing that, let alone a human being that has a brain. So we all get the point. And that's basically, that kind of sums up the whole concept of leaving Egypt. God willing, next week's class, we'll focus in on the concept of freedom. Because what I said now is not necessarily freedom. It's always, as you go higher, it feels like the old video games. As you've crossed one stage, what you've done now is you've entered the next stage, which is going to be even harder. And then so what's the celebration? Well, that's a celebration I accomplished. But if I stop here, the game ends here. It's no fun, right? You want to go to the next. I'm not advocating to sit and play video games, but I'm not saying that I never did, right? I remember we spoke about that. Just playing video games endlessly is just a waste of a good life. But I meant, when you do entertainment, the idea was you want to reach the next level, and then you want to reach the next level, right? And that is the sum total of leaving Egypt. He didn't, let me see.